It is good to be out with all of you tonight. And by all of you, I mean the few of you that are in here. This is like a low ratio tonight. So, we are going to talking through another aspect of the heart here tonight in the lesson, the respectful heart. Most of our text tonight will come out of 1 Samuel starting in chapter 24. And we'll look at 24 through 26, those chapters, as we go through the material here tonight. I did want to start off with just a little background again, as we're kind of chronologically following David through his life here. He is gone from being the slayer, the shepherd boy, right, who's picked out of the field, to being the slayer of the giant, to now being pursued by King Saul, being chased relentlessly by him. And then we're going to have a couple situations that come up here over these 3 chapters that are going to challenge David. But in all this, we'll be looking at this idea of him showing respect and talking through that tonight. So if you would, if you have your Bibles open here, I'm going to take us over to chapter 24 and start there. And if someone would read the first 11 verses of chapter 24 for us tonight. Thanks, Elliot. Yes, please. Thanks, Elliot. Okay, so you have this story. Saul, being the king, goes out to battle the Philistines, but then instead of keeping up that effort, he finds out where David is at. His hatred for David, or fear of David, however you want to look at this, is so great that he takes 3,000 men and he goes out and he pursues David. And what's Saul doing on his journey? Every 8-year-old boy in the room would giggle when you read this in class. So what's he doing in verse 3? You are going to have to participate. So just to get it out here now. Going potty. The literal word is he's covering his feet. So you understand that concept of what he is doing. Apparently caves were the old-timey little rest area stops, I guess. So that's where he went. He goes into the cave for a little privacy. He's in an extremely vulnerable moment. And the guy who's trying to kill you is now completely, literally exposed in front of you. And what do David's men say? Hey, this is a gift from God. He's brought him right here to you and left him completely vulnerable. You got to look at this in the right way. You should kill him now. And what does David say? That is the key thing. Think about that relationship between Saul and David and his God. This is the guy who is trying to kill him. And I don't mean trying as in if he had his opportunity, he's going to do it. He took 3,000 men to come and pursue him. And he comes all the way out into the wilderness. I don't know where En-Gedi is, but the only thing that lives out there is wild goats. And he's pursuing this guy that much. But then David's relationship with God is so much stronger that he says, that's the one that God chose to be king. I'm not going to strike him. So the question is, as we talk about this, is how does David show respect? And you can't say he didn't kill him. That's the easy answer. We already know that one. How does he show respect? All right, do we need to do the little hand song again? Wake you all up? Tammy? Well, we can talk about that piece. Was that respectful? It's better than what else he could have cut. Yeah. In comparison, maybe. He feels a little bit bad about it, right? And he goes back out and he confesses that, I'm sorry I ruined your cloak. Drew?
So obviously there's the mercy then, but there's also the submission in this confrontation.
Yeah.
Like submitting to the authority. And I've showed you this mercy, and I pledge my allegiance almost to you as long as you're Lord. Or not Lord, but King.
Yeah. What's he do in, I'm sorry, Ellie, go ahead. Okay, what's David do in verse 8? Huh? What? Yeah, in verse 8. And what's he do physically? Yeah. He bows down before him. All right, talk about the submission piece, the heart piece that is here. The guy who is going to kill him, pursuing him relentlessly, driving him out into the middle of nowhere. It looks like God gave him over to him, and David chooses to understand the anointed one. I'm not going to touch him. And he shows him even more respect by bowing down in front of him, even though he's got to be borderline now the worst king ever. So I would have been tempted just to launch the little clip of his robe that I took off, show him the knife that I used, and say, hey, buddy, you owe me, right? But David doesn't. He bows and gets prostrated. I got Drew back there, but you...
One part that strikes me on this, David's the anointed one at this point.
Yeah.
Yet he still calls Saul the anointed. What's your thought? That part kind of confuses me. Like, I can see why David's doing it in some way if he's just overly respectful for him, but from everything you expect from him, he is the Lord's anointed, and God did deliver Saul.
Right. Yeah, so it is clearly at this point in time that David has been anointed. As we talked about last night, his brothers obviously all know about this as well too. And there's several other, Samuel knows about it, those kind of things. And when you look at these scenarios, the only time that David brings this up is clear into 2 Samuel in chapter 6 when he brings in the ark successfully and Michal makes fun of him. That is the only time he brings it up, that God chose me over your dad. And that's the only time he brings it up. Saul will bring it up in both of or at least he alludes to it once and he mentions it directly in chapters 24 and 26. Drew?
Yeah, just thinking about if you ever, I'm sure everybody has heard the phrase, respect is earned, not given. I feel like from a godly perspective, respect is given, it's not earned. We respect everybody, no matter how wrong they are. The worst person in the world, we have to give them respect because they're an image bearer of God.
Right.
And
he understands who his true king is, right? And he's showing respect to the earthly king because of that. Good point. Any other thoughts on this? Okay. Oh, sorry, Dan.
We talk about David's respect. He's respecting Saul because he respects God.
Right.
And even though David has been anointed, and in chapter 16 where it says that the Spirit of the Lord has left Saul, Saul is still king. God has not removed him. And David respects that fact. Why is he coming to kill me? Why do I gotta hide in a cave? Why I gotta run all over the place and not become king yet? I don't know. But this is God's, and I'm going to respect God because Saul is still king.
Right. And it is interesting, too, just from I guess if you think of it from a perspective of just the world, right, that, again, his men are saying, now's the time, right? If I was sitting next to David, I could make the argument very clearly that God anointed you, he chose you, he's already withdrawn from Saul, and now he's giving Saul to you. Take it, right? And that is exactly the opposite of what God would have wanted. And David understands that very well. I want to look at a couple other pieces here, but I want you to keep in mind that idea of taking, and keep that in mind when we get to the application for ourselves here as well. So when you look at, as we go on down through this chapter here, so now starting in verse 12 here, or 11, you have this interaction between Saul and David. David gives a lot of dialogue here down through 16. When David had finished speaking these words, to Saul, Saul said, "Is that your voice, my son David?" Which is, I find that humorous in many ways. He's right there in front of you. You should be able to see him. But again, whatever else is going on with Saul and the spirit piece. And he's in verse 17, what does he say to David? What's Saul say to David? That too. Yes.
I just want to say, maybe that was Saul's way of saying, I can't believe that's you saying that. Unbelievable.
It could be, yeah. What he thinks is a great enemy to him, he's been given into his hands, and maybe that's why he's saying that. Can that really be you? Yeah, that's a good point, John. But he looks at him and he says, "You are more righteous than I, and for you have dealt well with me, while I have dealt wickedly with you." All right, Kathy?
So I did a little word study on righteous a while back, and it literally means to be in right relationship with others, in right relationship.
Nice, yeah.
And they both, I mean, obviously it's God first, but
Right.
if you're doing right by God, you're doing right
By others too. That's a great point. So that if you can hear Kathy, it's that idea of righteousness is being in a right relationship with God and a right relationship with others, and obviously in that order. And you clearly see that in David, and you see it missing in Saul as well. The other piece I want to bring up here too, and I'm sorry I skipped this. In verse 12, David says, "May the Lord judge between you and me, and may the Lord avenge me on you, but my hand shall not be against you." So how does Saul actually die? Because we're not going to actually talk about this through the course of the classes here.
Exactly that way.
Yeah,
David's personal hand is not in it.
right. David has nothing to do with it. God, by design, takes David completely out of the picture, and he's nowhere near around the battle that goes on with the Philistines. The other piece that comes out of this, too, if you like to see God's perfect plan coming into play at different times, do you guys remember who Saul was battling and who he was fighting against when he failed to follow the orders? What tribe that was? Starts with an A and ends with a Lakite. Yeah, the Amalekites, okay? And King Agag is the one that he does not kill, and Samuel the prophet slaughters him. At the end of Saul's life, if if the person is not lying to David when you get over to 1 Samuel or 2 Samuel chapter 8, it is an Amalekite who kills him and then takes his crown and his cuffs and brings them to David and says, look at this great thing that I did for you. In a show of respect, though, does anybody know? I know this wasn't in the reading piece of it, but what does David do to the Amalekite? He kills him, and why does he kill him? Right. You didn't respect God's anointed? Why did you think that that was okay to do that? And then there's going to be a couple other idiots that come along later on who killed their master, and David's going to say the same thing to them. I killed this foreigner when he killed Saul, and you're going to die too because you thought it was okay to kill an innocent man while he was sleeping in his bed, right? And David just clearly follows that and that respect for God's design of things and adheres to it just throughout all these different pieces. So I've been talking a lot. Any other thoughts around this? I love you guys. Okay. So, it says, my hand won't be against you. Talks about the good that you have done to me. There are other components that go on with this thing. If you think about just through the life of David in different times, right, that this had to be hard on David. I don't care how great and how much his devotion is. He's leaning on God, don't get me wrong on this, but that had to be hard to keep dealing with this time and time again. So as we go through the rest of this next chapter here, I want to jump over to the chapter 25 and talk about this a little bit. So this is the story, starting in verse 2, this is the story of Nabal and Abigail. And I don't know, somebody familiar enough with this story to give a synopsis of this one? Be brave. I'm older now. I'm very good with quiet, but this is going to get awkward for all of us. So someone give me a synopsis of this story. That's close. There was some yelling. Mm-hmm. It's the best answer all night. That's great. Okay. What does Nabal mean? Thank you, Lauren. Nabal means fool. Abigail is his wife. Somehow the fool is extremely wealthy. And it's the time for shearing of the sheep. And all the time that he has been and his men have been out in the wilderness with his sheep, David's men, anytime they were around, watched over them, protected them, and guarded them. And so it's time to shear the sheep. I know nothing about the physical sheep kind of thing. I don't know what that process is, but apparently there's a party when you shear them, and unfortunately for the sheep, they lose their wool, and some of them get eaten. And so they slaughter some of the sheep at the same time. And so David sends men to say, hey, remember all those nice things that I did for you? I know things are going really great for you. Why don't you give me a little bit of mutton so my men can have some celebration too? And Nabal very wisely says, if someone can read, so you guys can become familiar with this story, in verse 10, someone read 10 through, or just 10 and 11. Tammy, thanks.
Then Nabal answered David's servants and said, who is David, and who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants nowadays who break away, each one from his master. Shall I then take my bread and my water and my meat that I have killed for my shearers and give it to men when I do not know where they are?
Okay. Does that sound respectful? Sound like Nabal's very thankful for all the times that David's men helped his men out? Yeah. He makes it a point to make him sound like he's some sort of total outsider rogue, right, that just happens to be showing up lately, and lumps him in a group with other people that seem to be doing the same thing, which is kind of funny. Okay, so they leave, and then someone, they come back to David, they tell him what was said, and if someone could read verse 13. Drew.
David said unto his men, Gird ye on every man his sword. And they girded on every man his sword, and David also girded on his sword. And they went up after David, about 400 men, 200 of those by the stuff.
Okay, so I have no idea how big Nabal's family is, but 400 men seems a bit excessive in my estimation of things. But what do you think David is going to do with the 400 men who girded on their swords? Yes, it's a battle at the OK Corral. I think he's going to have all the sheep that he wants, and I think everybody's going to be slaughtered, is what he's obviously working towards. And so, okay, does anybody know what happens next? Right. Okay. So one of the men who was around when Nabal responds to David's men hurriedly goes to Abigail, his wife, and says, you know he's a fool, and this is what the fool did. And so Abigail quickly gets some food together, and she hightails it down to head off what she knows is going to happen. Okay? Does Abigail know who David is? Yeah. She knows him quite well, actually, and knows quite a bit about him. This woman, in my opinion, is, number one, sent from God, and number two, just a brilliant woman, a God-fearing woman, in not so great of a situation with Nabal, but she shows a great deal of respect to Nabal, even through all of this. I think she could have went off and pleaded and said it wasn't all these people, it was just this guy, and he's really the cause of all the problem. But when she shows up and she gets down there, she gets down off of her donkey. In verse 23, she falls on her face before David, and she said, on me alone, my Lord, be the blame. Please let your maidservant speak to you. Think about that humility. Think about that respect for her husband, despite his poor choices and what she's trying to do here. And so, in the rest of the story, she reasons with David, and she points out to him, Nabal's, again, not the greatest man. His name means folly, but your maidservant just wasn't there. And so she makes this plea, and then she goes on in verse 26, therefore, my Lord, as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, since the Lord restrained you from shedding blood and from avenging yourself on your own hand, now then let your enemies and those seek evil against my Lord be as Nabal. And then she gives this gift to him. And then the key piece here in verse 32, David says to Abigail, blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who sent you to me this day, and blessed be your discernment, and blessed be you who have kept me this day from bloodshed and from avenging myself by my own hand. This is David sitting in a cave saying, I'm not going to avenge myself, to now being upset about not getting fed, and it was going to avenge himself. The drastic change in that, but still a man after God's own heart. And God sends this wonderful, intelligent, brilliant woman as his servant, and David listens and yields to what she says and does not avenge himself. And so, again, I hope you see the thematic piece of the respect playing out in this, and obviously, more importantly, David's respect for God through all of this. All right, thoughts, comments?
One thing for sure, Brian, with the two of them, it was opposite attracts. In that particular case, as smart as she was, as fearful she
Agreed. I think if you couldn't hear Randy completely, the lesson that God uses Abigail to teach David, I think is critical. And I think it's critical because in the next chapter, David's going to have a very same opportunity to kill Saul one more time, and he's not going to take it. Sorry to be the spoiler if you hadn't seen this movie. So I think Abigail, though, is the linchpin, and this whole interaction is the linchpin to get him into the right mindset and to reset him and get him looking back to the Lord again. I think if he had killed Nabal, then it kind of went off the rails. And I know that's total speculation, but I think that's where he was heading, because to Randy's point, 400 men is excessive. You do not need 400 people to go after whatever Nabal's people got. And clearly the servants didn't like Nabal. I would have just thrown down the sword and go, I didn't do it, if I was one of his servants. But he says, I was not going to leave a man alive. Elliot.
One thing is I was reading this, I looked up a little bit more, but like Calebite, I wasn't really sure what that meant. But apparently it's descended from the lineage of Caleb,
Yeah.
Joshua's assistant or second in command. So this person, who knows how well connected that family was, but it's put in there for a reason.
Yeah.
The fact that David has 400 armed men, well 600 or more, right? Because in some states, like at this point suggests people know who David is by first name. So the fact that it's not just he ignored the help, he also ignored and disrespected who David was.
Right.
So, interesting the juxtaposition with the Saul situation.
Yes.
Cool, but it also shows David's tempestuousness and his anger, but and also the human side of him.
Yeah.
I know probably many of us do it here. Get angry at either you say some things or say, hey, I shouldn't have reacted in that way on a relatively frequent basis.
Right.
And beat yourself up for it afterwards. And yes, you should. And yes, we should do better.
Right.
And, David, a man after God's own heart, had that same thing and was planning to do some pretty hardcore stuff, frankly, a massacre.
Yeah.
It looks like. Yet the lesson in there is God sent him a sign and he listened.
Right. Agreed. Okay. Before we get too far on this, what happens to Nabal? Yep. Has a stroke, he's paralyzed, and the Lord kills him 10 days later. And then Abigail becomes, after her time of mourning, she becomes his wife. So now, chapter 26, when, Salyers is texting me about the class while we're up here. Anyway, all right, so chapter 26, again, Saul is pursuing David. He's in the wilderness of Ziph in verse 2. Again, how many men does he take? These are the easy questions. 3,000 to go after David's possibly 600 men out in the middle of nowhere. And then Saul is camping this time, and there's going to be a similar situation that goes on here. So what happens this time between David and Saul? Yes, you're right. I need some translation, but you're very close. Okay. Last time we saw Saul in this situation, he was extremely vulnerable. Is he vulnerable this time?
Doesn't he dress like ordinary?
No, he's asleep. Yeah, this is the one where he's asleep. He's camping with all of his soldiers. He's asleep. The Lord is involved in this because David is able to get up this close, and the Lord had caused the sleep to go on them. But sitting next to Saul is his water jug and his spear. And they get up there, and David's companion Abishai says, let me just take care of this. It won't take me 2 strokes of this spear. 1 and we're done, and we're out of here. And David again, in verse 9, says to him, do not destroy him, for who could stretch out his hand against the Lord's anointed without guilt? Right? Again, David being respectful, not so much to the person, but definitely to the position and to the God who put him there. And then he goes on and he says, surely, in verse 10, I will not strike him, or his day, for his day will come that he dies, or he will go down in battle and perish. Lord forbid that I should stretch out my hand against the Lord's anointed. And they take the spear and the water jug, and then they go over to the other side of the hill, and they start yelling. This time he has this interaction with Abner, who is the commander of the army for Saul, and makes fun of Abner. Abner failed to protect his king. The enemy should not have been able to get that close and should have been put to death. And so there's some interaction there and some banter that goes on there as well. Tell me what you're thinking. What would you have done? So we talk. Is that huh? Yeah. Yeah. No, I try to put myself there too, and I'm like, this is the second time. Did I miss the opportunity the first time? God's given to me again? Drew?
Just depends on whether or not we decide to submit ourselves to God in that moment.
Beautiful thought. 100% agree. Drew?
I like in verse 9, David's response to Abishai, for who can stretch forth his hand against the Lord anointed and be guiltless? So, right, you can do it, but you're going to have this guilt before the Lord. So, all throughout all of this, David understands who God is and who Saul is, and what killing Saul would do not only to him but to Ahithophel.
Right.
You can do it, but you will have this guilt before the Lord, and I'm not going to do it.
Okay.
And you are right.
Thank you for bringing that up. His verbiage there is very similar to exactly what Abigail rationalizes with him to get him to not do what he's going to do. She tells him, if you look back on your life and you do this, you're going to have this guilt. And you have blood on your hands. And this time, that's almost exactly, at least it seems like David is alluding to that same comment. Yeah.
Sometimes we have situations like this, not particularly this, right? Like, you know, is God wanting me to do this or not? Right? Am I doing everything? And I've always heard some people say tonight, you forget it. But it's important to remember that in whatever thing that we're thinking or whatever decision we're making, is this going to bring glory to God?
Right.
And the respect that David shows to God brings him glory. And that's how he's guiding his decision of Abishai's heart. I think that is wonderful and brings him praise.
Right. I agree. All right. So think about this as we've talked through the classes. How does Jesus show respect? Mark?
When he was in the trial, he said he had to still respect the high priest,
Yep.
even though he was being mistreated.
Yeah.
He said, this is God's anointed high priest.
Right. Okay. So in the trial? Really?
On some names here, but when he was out with the apostles and the Roman soldiers came to get him, right, and like pretty much was, hey, I'm going to go with them, right, let's not fuck with us. And then went in front of the Roman commander of the region and showed him respect and talked to him.
Yep.
Even though he could have done whatever he wanted and he had the power to do so.
Yeah.
The man was in a place of power, earthly power, but still established, and he showed respect there.
Okay. Dwayne?
One that amazes me is when the scribes and those women called him good teacher.
Yeah.
He says, don't call me good. There's only one that's good, my Father in heaven.
Right.
How can you describe that?
Right. No, that's very good.
You said remember to see. Sorry.
That's okay. Lauren and then Drew. Then you. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good way. Yeah. 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 That's a great one, Lauren. Drew. Oh, okay. What were you saying, Randy?
Just said that when he was asked about taxes, he said, "Render to Caesar."
Yeah. Whose likeness is on it? Give it back to him. You look in. I'll give a couple of examples here, and I want to move on. But not want to. We have to. In Matthew 23, when he talks about respect the position of the Sadducees and Pharisees because they sit in the chair of Moses, these are the same people that he's going to go on to pronounce these woes against, but they are there. And then Philippians 2, verses 5 through 11, specifically in 6, not regarding equality with God, a thing to be grasped. So the question for us, how do we show respect? Drew? Okay. All right. What did Eve want in the garden? Knowledge. Satan says if you eat this, God knows that you'll be just like him. That is the same struggle we deal with as well, and not respecting that authority and that position when we go out beyond God's rule. That we want to be just like God, or we're saying we know better than God. And that same struggle is the same thing that we deal with now in our lives as well. Okay, I'll shut up. There's a big one in Romans. What's the other way we show respect?
Romans 13 talks about ranking with the king.
Yep. That's exactly who put the government in position. God. Was Saul a good king? Do you remember all in the little kids classes they used to have the pictures of the kings, and some would be frowny faces and some would be smiley faces, right? And they had all those things. There's a lot of frowns when you go back through there, but every single one of those was put in place by God for a reason. You may not like who's sitting in the position. That's not what respect is about. You will respect the position, and you'll do it because your God, who you truly respect and fear and revere, says that I'm the one who put him there. And you are going to respect them. And that should change. We should be different than the world around us. And I know politics is a fun topic. So the other one I'll put in here before I get dinged is I want you to think a lot about thankfulness. And David wrote a lot of Psalms about this, and I spent too much time on the history part of this too, but David wrote a lot of Psalms about this too. Showing gratitude is in my opinion, is one of the greatest and most simplest ways to show respect. God giving us stuff, people sharing stuff with us, and showing that gratitude. So, go, Mike. Yeah, and it comes with being humble too. Good point. All right, thank you all very much. Lord willing, tomorrow night we'll be in 2 Samuel chapter 9.
help us to do